It was just a portrait of a noble family, but one hidden detail exposed their dark secret. The photograph had been stored in a climate-controlled vault at the Massachusetts Historical Society for 37 years. It arrived in 1982 as part of a larger donation from the Ashford family estate. Boxes of documents, letters, and images chronicling one of New England's most prominent industrial families. Dr. Rachel Chen, a photographic historian specializing in post-Civil War era images, pulled the photograph from its archival sleeve on a cold morning in February 2019. She was working on a project documenting northern industrial families during Reconstruction, and the Ashford collection had been recommended by a colleague. The photograph was remarkably well preserved. It showed a formal family portrait taken in what appeared to be a grand parlor. A man in his mid-40s with a severe expression and perfectly groomed beard, a woman in an elaborate dark dress with intricate lace details, and 3 children arranged by height. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 6, sat on a velvet cushion. Behind them, the room spoke of wealth. Ornate furniture, heavy curtains, and decorative objects carefully positioned to display the family's refinement. Rachel had seen hundreds of similar portraits. Wealthy families in the 1860s and 1870s often commissioned formal photographs to document their status and respectability. This one seemed entirely unremarkable. She was about to return it to its sleeve when something caught her eye. In the background, partially obscured by the eldest son's shoulder, was what appeared to be a mirror with an ornate silver frame. Rachel reached for her magnifying glass, a habit born from years of examining photographic details that others missed. The mirror's surface was dark in the photograph, barely reflecting anything. But there was something there. A shape, a shadow. Rachel rolled her chair to the digital scanner and carefully positioned the photograph on the glass surface. The machine hummed as it captured the image in high resolution. On her computer screen, the photograph appeared with startling clarity. She zoomed in on the mirror, her cursor hovering over the dark reflection. Then she adjusted the brightness and contrast settings, slowly bringing out details that had been invisible to the naked eye for over 150 years. Her breath caught. In the mirror's reflection, barely visible but unmistakable once enhanced, was a figure, a woman, and around her neck and wrists were what appeared to be chains or restraints. Rachel's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Within 2 hours, 3 other historians had gathered in Rachel's workspace at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Dr. Michael Torres, an expert in American slavery and post-Civil War history, stood closest to the screen, his face inches from the monitor. Beside him, Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in African American history during Reconstruction, adjusted her glasses repeatedly as she studied the enhanced image. The third person, James Bradford, was a forensic imaging specialist who had worked on several high-profile historical photograph authentication cases. "Can you be certain this isn't an artifact of the enhancement process?" Patricia asked, her voice careful and measured. "Digital manipulation can sometimes create patterns that weren't originally there." James shook his head. "I've already run 3 different enhancement algorithms. The figure appears in all of them, in the same position, with the same details. This isn't a digital artifact. It was captured by the camera in 1867. Michael leaned back, running a hand through his gray hair. "Do we know anything about this family? The Ashfords?" Rachel pulled up a file on her secondary monitor. "The donation records identify them as the Ashford family of Salem, Massachusetts. The man in the photograph is William Ashford, who made his fortune in textile manufacturing during the 1850s. He supplied fabric to the Union Army during the Civil War, which increased his wealth considerably. His wife was Catherine Ashford, formerly Catherine Morrison, from a prominent Boston family. The children are Edmund, the eldest at 14, Margaret, age 10, and Elizabeth, the youngest at 6. "Salem," Patricia said quietly. "That's significant." Salem had a small but established black community during this period. After the Civil War, many formerly enslaved people moved north seeking opportunities. The photograph is dated 1867, Michael noted, 2 years after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. If the Ashfords were keeping someone enslaved at that point, it would have been completely illegal. "Not just illegal," Patricia added. "It would have been one of the most serious crimes imaginable in that moment." The entire nation had just fought a war over slavery. Northern industrialists, especially ones who had profited from supplying the Union Army, would have faced enormous public outrage if they were discovered keeping enslaved people. Rachel zoomed in further on the reflection. The woman's face was too obscured to make out features clearly, but her posture suggested she was standing, and the restraints were visible on both her wrists and around her neck. "We need to find out who she was," Rachel said. "And we need to understand how this photographer captured her image, whether it was accidental or intentional." James was already examining other details of the photograph. "Look at the composition. The photographer positioned the family very deliberately. But this mirror, it's placed at an odd angle. Most photographers of this era would have either removed mirrors from the frame or positioned them so they wouldn't create distracting reflections. Unless, Michael said slowly, the photographer wanted to capture what was in that reflection." The 4 historians looked at each other, the weight of that possibility settling over them. "We need to identify the photographer," Patricia said. "If this was intentional, if someone deliberately documented evidence of illegal enslavement, then this photograph isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a deliberate act of resistance, of bearing witness to a crime. Rachel spent the rest of that day examining every inch of the photograph for identifying marks. Photographers in the 1860s typically stamped or embossed their work with studio names, but this image had no visible marking on the front. She carefully removed it from its archival sleeve and examined the back. There, in faded ink, barely legible after 152 years, was a stamp. J. Morrison and Combs. Fine photography. Boston, Mass. Morrison, Rachel said aloud, though she was alone in the archive room. The name struck her immediately. Catherine Ashford's maiden name had been Morrison. This wasn't a coincidence. She pulled up city directories for Boston in the 1860s. James Morrison operated a photography studio on Tremont Street from 1862 to 1871. Additional research revealed something more interesting. James Morrison was Catherine Ashford's younger brother. Rachel called Patricia immediately. The photographer was Catherine's brother. He would have known the family intimately. If he captured that reflection deliberately, he was documenting a crime committed by his own sister and brother-in-law. That makes it even more significant, Patricia replied. Family loyalty was paramount in that era, especially among wealthy families. For him to create evidence against them would have been an enormous risk. Over the next week, Rachel and her colleagues pursued every available lead. Michael discovered that William Ashford's textile factory had been investigated in 1869 by labor inspectors following complaints about working conditions. The investigation found nothing criminal, but several witnesses had mentioned that Ashford kept peculiar hours at his home and was known to be secretive about his domestic arrangements. Patricia found records from the Salem African Methodist Episcopal Church showing that in 1868, congregation members had inquired about a young black woman who had been seen briefly in the Ashford household in 1866 but had subsequently disappeared. The church had written to local authorities, but there was no record of any investigation. She existed, Patricia said when she shared this finding with the group. She was real, she was seen, and people noticed when she vanished, but no one with power cared enough to investigate seriously. James, meanwhile, had been researching James Morrison's later life. He found an obituary from 1889 that mentioned Morrison had struggled with his conscience in his later years and had become an advocate for social justice causes, though the obituary didn't specify which causes. He felt guilty, James said. He knew what he'd captured in that photograph, and it haunted him. Rachel made a decision. We need to go to Salem. The Ashford mansion might still be standing, and there might be local records, property documents, tax records, something that tells us more about who was in that house in 1867. The drive to Salem took just under an hour. The Ashford mansion, they discovered, was still standing but had been converted into a small museum focusing on maritime history. The current curator, an elderly man named Robert Hayes, seemed puzzled by their interest in the Ashford family. The Ashfords haven't lived here since the 1920s, he said, leading them through the building. The house was sold several times before the Historical Society acquired it. Most of the original furnishings are gone. What about the basement? Patricia asked. Would it be possible to see it? Robert looked surprised. The basement? There's nothing down there but storage and old heating systems. But if you'd like to see it, I can show you. They followed him down a narrow staircase. The basement of the Ashford mansion was exactly as Robert had described. Cluttered with storage boxes, old museum displays that had been retired, and the remnants of heating systems from various eras. The space was divided into several rooms, their original purposes unclear. Patricia walked slowly through each room, her trained eye looking for anything that might indicate the space's historical use. Most of the rooms had stone walls and dirt floors, typical of 1850s construction in New England, but one room, toward the back of the basement, was different. Look at this, she called to the others. The room was smaller than the rest, perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet. Unlike the other basement rooms, this one had been finished with wooden plank flooring and plastered walls, though both were now badly deteriorated. There were mounting brackets on the walls where shelves or fixtures had once been attached, and on one wall, at about waist height, were 4 metal rings embedded in the stone beneath the crumbling plaster. Michael knelt beside the rings, examining them carefully. These are anchor points. They're deliberately installed into the foundation stone. This wasn't for shelving. Robert, who had followed them into the room, looked uncomfortable. I've never really paid attention to this room. We just use it for overflow storage. What do you think those rings were for? Restraints, Patricia said quietly. This room was designed to hold someone? Rachel was photographing every detail with her phone. She noticed something else. Scratches on the wooden floor near one of the wall rings. She knelt down, brushing away dust with her hand. The scratches formed letters, carved deeply into the wood as if with a nail or piece of metal. Sarah, 1866. She left her name, Rachel whispered. She wanted someone to find it. The 4 historians and the curator stood in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them. This wasn't just a historical curiosity anymore. They were standing in the room where a woman had been held captive, where she had carved her name into the floor in what might have been her only act of resistance. Sarah, Michael repeated. Now we have a name. Patricia was already on her phone, photographing the carved name. We need to search for every record we can find of black women named Sarah in or around Salem between 1865 and 1870. Birth records, death records, church registries, census data, anything. Robert looked shaken. I've been curator here for 15 years. I've given hundreds of tours about the maritime history of Salem and the merchant families who lived in these houses. I never knew. I never even thought to look. Most people didn't, Patricia said gently. That's how these crimes persisted. Because wealthy families could hide their secrets behind respectable facades, and because the people who suffered were considered invisible. They spent another hour documenting every detail of the basement room before returning upstairs. Rachel felt sick to her stomach, but also driven by a fierce determination. Sarah had left her name. She had wanted to be remembered, to be found, and now, 153 years later, they had found her. Back at the Massachusetts Historical Society that evening, the team reconvened to plan their next steps. Michael had already begun searching through digitized records of the Freedmen's Bureau, which had documented formerly enslaved people during Reconstruction. Patricia was going through church records from every black congregation in Essex County. James was analyzing the photograph again, trying to determine if there were any other hidden details they might have missed. Rachel sat at her desk, staring at the photograph of the Ashford family with their perfect poses and expensive clothes, knowing now what lay beneath their house while that photograph was taken. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Patricia had posted a query on a genealogy forum frequented by researchers focusing on African American family histories during Reconstruction. Within 24 hours, she received a response from a woman named Gloria Thompson in Philadelphia. My great-great-grandmother's sister was named Sarah, Gloria's message read. Family stories say she went to work for a wealthy family in Massachusetts in 1866 and was never heard from again. The family tried to find her, but they had no resources and no connections. They were told she had run off, but my great-great-grandmother never believed it. She said Sarah wouldn't have left without sending word. Patricia called Gloria immediately. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Gloria explained that her family had been part of a community of formerly enslaved people who had settled in Pennsylvania after the war. Sarah had been born in Virginia in 1848 and had come north with her family in 1865, seeking opportunities in the Free States. She was 18 when she disappeared, Gloria said. The family story is that she answered an advertisement for domestic work in a wealthy household. She was promised good wages and respectable employment. She sent one letter home after she arrived, saying the house was grand and the work wasn't too difficult. Then nothing. My great-great-grandmother wrote letters to the address Sarah had given, but they were all returned unopened. Do you still have that first letter Sarah sent? Patricia asked, her heart racing. We do, Gloria said. It's been passed down through the family. I have it here. Gloria sent photographs of the letter that evening. It was written in careful, simple handwriting on plain paper, dated September 1866. Dear Mama and Papa, I have arrived safely in Salem. The house is very fine, bigger than any I have seen. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford seem respectable people. I have my own small room and the work is manageable. They have 3 children who are well behaved. I will write again soon. I miss you all. Your daughter, Sarah. Rachel compared the date with the photograph. September 1866. The photograph was taken in June 1867, 9 months later. Something happened in those 9 months. Michael had been researching William Ashford's business dealings during that period. I found something. In February 1867, Ashford's textile factory had a major fire. There was an investigation into whether he had deliberately set it for insurance money. He was ultimately cleared, but during the investigation, several people testified that Ashford had been acting strangely in the months before the fire. Paranoid, secretive, and volatile. Financial stress, Patricia said. Men like Ashford, when they faced potential ruin, often became dangerous. Their sense of control, their status, everything they built their identity on, it was threatened. James added another piece. I found an insurance claim document from March 1867. Ashford claimed significant losses from the fire, but noted that certain valuable items had been secured before the fire. The insurance company questioned this, suggesting Ashford had removed property before the fire, which would indicate foreknowledge. So he was under financial pressure, under investigation, and becoming increasingly unstable, Rachel summarized. And Sarah was in his house, witnessing all of this. Patricia pulled up a document she'd found earlier. There's one more thing. In May 1867, Catherine Ashford's brother James, our photographer, wrote a letter to a friend that was later published in a collection of his correspondence. He wrote, I am greatly troubled by certain situations in my sister's household. I fear there are circumstances which, if known, would bring shame upon the family. He knew, Michael said. He knew what was happening to Sarah, and it troubled him enough to mention it in correspondence. Thus, but not enough to do anything directly, Patricia noted. Not enough to report it to authorities or confront his sister and brother-in-law. Instead, he documented it. He created evidence through the photograph. They sat in silence, piecing together the timeline. Sarah had come to Salem in September 1866 as a free woman seeking honest work. At some point between then and June 1867, William Ashford had imprisoned her. Rachel decided they needed to understand James Morrison better. not just as a photographer, but as a man who had witnessed a crime and chosen to document it rather than prevent it. She requested access to the Morrison family papers, which were held at the Boston Athenaeum. The collection was extensive. James Morrison had been a prolific letter writer, and his correspondence with friends, family, and professional colleagues spanned 4 decades. Rachel spent 3 days reading through the letters, looking for any reference to his sister Catherine or the Ashford family. She found the first significant letter dated December 1866, written to a college friend. "My sister Catherine writes that she is quite satisfied with her new domestic servant, a young Negro woman from Pennsylvania. Catherine says the girl is clean, obedient, and competent. I confess I'm pleased that my sister is treating a freed person with fairness and offering honest employment. It gives me hope that we might indeed become the nation we claim to be." The tone was optimistic, even naive. James Morrison clearly believed, in late 1866, that his sister was doing something admirable by employing a formerly enslaved woman. The next relevant letter was dated March 1867, addressed to the same friend. "I visited Catherine's household last week and found the atmosphere greatly changed. My brother-in-law William is consumed with worry over some business matter. I gather there has been trouble with his factory. Catherine seems diminished somehow, less spirited than I remember. I inquired after the domestic servant Catherine had mentioned, thinking to compliment the household's management. But Catherine became evasive and changed the subject. When I pressed, William entered the room and stated curtly that the girl had proven unsatisfactory and had been dismissed. There was something in his manner that unsettled me, though I cannot articulate what." Rachel photographed the letter and continued reading. The next reference came in May 1867. "I am burdened by a suspicion I dare not voice. During my most recent visit to Catherine, I saw something that troubles me greatly. I entered a hallway and heard a sound from below, a sound that seemed human but muffled, as if someone were calling out from a great distance. When I asked Catherine about it, she claimed it was merely the house settling, the old timbers creaking. But the sound haunted me. That evening I observed William closely. He is a changed man, furtive, watchful, and given to sudden rages. I fear something terrible is occurring in that house, but I have no proof, and Catherine will not speak honestly with me." James had suspected. He had heard Sarah, but he hadn't acted. The letter that explained the photograph was dated July 1867, written after the photograph had been taken, but clearly referencing it. "I have done something that may damn me or redeem me, depending on how it is judged." When Catherine requested I photograph the family for a formal portrait, I agreed, but I made certain preparations. I positioned the family such that a particular mirror would be captured in the frame. That mirror reflected a portion of the doorway to the basement stairs. My hope, or perhaps my prayer, was that some evidence of my suspicions would be captured. When I developed the plate, I saw something in that mirror's reflection that confirmed my worst fears, but I am a coward. I cannot confront William directly, as he is volatile and powerful. I cannot report my suspicions to authorities without proof, and even with proof, I fear Catherine would be ruined alongside William. So I have created a record. Perhaps someday, when I am no longer here to face the consequences, someone will see what I have seen and demand justice. Rachel sat back, the letter in her hands. James Morrison had known. He had deliberately captured evidence. And then he had done nothing with it except preserve it for some future reckoning that he would not live to see. Finding out what happened to Sarah after the photograph was taken proved more difficult. There were no missing person reports filed in 1867. Authorities rarely took seriously the disappearance of black women, especially if a white employer claimed they had simply left their employment. But Michael found a reference in a Salem newspaper from August 1867 that made them all stop cold. The household of Mr. William Ashford on Federal Street was visited by police on Tuesday last, following reports of a disturbance. Neighbors reported hearing sounds of distress late in the evening. Officers found nothing amiss, and Mr. Ashford expressed annoyance at the intrusion. No charges were filed. "Someone heard her," Patricia said, reading the article over Michael's shoulder. "Someone called the police, and the police came and they did nothing. Because William Ashford was wealthy and respected," Michael added bitterly, "and Sarah was no one to them." Rachel kept searching. She found property records showing that the Ashfords sold their Salem house in September 1867, just 3 months after the photograph was taken, and moved to a smaller residence in Boston. The sale happened quickly, suggesting urgency. "They got rid of the house," James observed, "either because they feared further investigation or because there was no longer anyone to hide," Patricia finished quietly. The death certificate that confirmed their worst fears came from the Massachusetts State Archives. It was dated August 25th, 1867. Name, unknown Negro woman. Age, approximately 20 years. Cause of death, pneumonia. Body discovered in abandoned warehouse on Danvers Street, Salem. No known relations. Buried in Potter's Field. Ours, the date was 1 week after the police had visited the Ashford house following reports of disturbance. Patricia cross-referenced the location. Danvers Street was less than half a mile from the Ashford mansion, a warehouse owned until earlier that year by one of William Ashford's business associates. "He moved her," Michael said. "When the police came to his house and found nothing, he moved her to another location, and she died there. The medical examiner's report, which they found attached to the death certificate, was brief but revealing. The subject showed evidence of prolonged malnourishment and physical abuse. Restraint marks visible on wrists and ankles. Advanced pneumonia consistent with exposure to cold and damp conditions over extended period. Sarah had been 19 years old. She had come to Massachusetts seeking freedom and opportunity. And she had died in chains in a warehouse, unnamed and unmourned by anyone except the family, who would never know what happened to her. Rachel contacted Gloria Thompson with the information. The call was difficult. Gloria cried when Rachel explained what they had found, but she also expressed gratitude. "At least now we know," Gloria said. "My great-great-grandmother died believing Sarah had simply disappeared. Now we know what happened to her. Now we can tell her story." Patricia had been researching what legal recourse might exist. William Ashford died in 1892, with no record of ever being prosecuted for Sarah's death. Catherine lived until 1899. James Morrison died in 1889, having never publicly revealed what he knew. The photograph remained in the family archives, the evidence hidden in plain sight, until now. "We need to tell this story publicly," Rachel said, "not just in academic journals. People need to know that slavery didn't end cleanly in 1865, that wealthy families in the North committed these crimes and were never held accountable." Rachel and her colleagues spent 6 weeks preparing a comprehensive report on their findings. They compiled the photograph, the enhanced image showing Sarah in the mirror's reflection, the letters from James Morrison, the basement room with Sarah's name carved into the floor, Gloria Thompson's family history, and the death certificate of the unnamed young black woman who was almost certainly Sarah. The Massachusetts Historical Society agreed to host a press conference and major exhibition. Rachel had been nervous about going public. This was the kind of discovery that could be sensationalized or dismissed as speculation, but Patricia convinced her it was necessary. "Sarah carved her name into that floor because she wanted to be remembered," Patricia said. "We owe it to her to make sure she is." The press conference took place on a Tuesday morning in November 2019. The room was packed with journalists from local and national outlets, along with historians, activists, and members of the public who had heard about the discovery through social media. Rachel stood at the podium, the original photograph displayed on a large screen behind her. She spoke clearly and carefully, walking the audience through every step of their investigation. "What you're looking at is a photograph of the Ashford family, taken in June 1867 in Salem, Massachusetts," she began. For 152 years, this photograph appeared to be nothing more than a typical portrait of a wealthy, industrial family, but modern imaging technology has revealed something that has been hidden all this time. The screen changed to show the enhanced image of the mirror, with Sarah's figure clearly visible in the reflection. The room erupted. Journalists began shouting questions. Cameras flashed. Rachel waited for the noise to settle before continuing. The woman in this reflection is Sarah, a young black woman who had come to Massachusetts from Pennsylvania seeking employment. The Ashford family kept her enslaved in their basement, in violation of the 13th Amendment, which had abolished slavery 2 years earlier. She died in August 1867 in a warehouse owned by one of William Ashford's associates. She was 19 years old. Patricia spoke next, providing the historical context. The ways wealthy families in the North had maintained oppressive practices even after slavery was officially abolished, the lack of legal recourse for black women during this period, and the complicity of institutions that chose not to investigate crimes against black people. Michael discussed the photographer, James Morrison, and the moral complexity of his choice to document the crime rather than prevent it. He created evidence, but he lacked the courage to act on it. His choice left Sarah trapped, but it also left us this record. We must grapple with both of those truths. The questions from the press were intense. How could they be certain the woman in the reflection was Sarah? What direct evidence connected her to the Ashford household? Why hadn't James Morrison reported what he knew? Rachel and her colleagues answered each question methodically, presenting the accumulated evidence: the church inquiries about Sarah's disappearance, the letter she had sent home mentioning the Ashford family by name, the police report of a disturbance at the Ashford residence, the death certificate describing a young black woman found nearby with evidence of prolonged abuse and restraint, and Sarah's name carved into the basement floor. "We cannot prove beyond any legal doubt that the woman in the mirror is Sarah," Rachel acknowledged, "but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, and even if we could not identify her specifically, the photograph proves that the Ashford family kept someone imprisoned in their home. That alone is significant." The exhibition opened to the public the following day. Thousands of people came in the first week alone. The photograph was displayed alongside all the documentation: the letters, the death certificate, photographs of the basement room, and a detailed timeline of Sarah's life and disappearance. Gloria Thompson and several other members of Sarah's family traveled to Boston for the opening. They stood together in front of the photograph, looking at the faint reflection of their ancestor. "She's there," Gloria said quietly. After all this time, she's still there, still bearing witness. The story went viral within days. News outlets across the country picked it up. Social media exploded with discussions about the photograph, about slavery in the North, about wealthy families who had never been held accountable for their crimes. The Ashford family, or rather the descendants who still carried the name, initially tried to distance themselves from the story. A spokesperson issued a statement claiming that the current family members had no connection to William and Catherine Ashford's actions, and that they condemned slavery in all its forms. But public pressure mounted. Historians began investigating other wealthy northern families, looking for similar hidden crimes. Archivists across the country started re-examining their photographic collections, using modern imaging technology to search for other hidden details that might reveal secrets. Rachel received hundreds of emails and messages. Some were supportive, praising her work in bringing Sarah's story to light. Others were hostile, accusing her of attacking a respected family's reputation or making assumptions based on insufficient evidence. But the most meaningful messages came from descendants of enslaved people and from black families who had their own stories of ancestors who had disappeared in the North during Reconstruction, never to be heard from again. My great-great-grandfather vanished in New York in 1870, one woman wrote. The family was told he ran off, but they never believed it. Your work with Sarah makes me think we should investigate more carefully. The exhibition was extended by popular demand, eventually running for 6 months. Museums in other cities requested traveling versions. The photograph became one of the most widely reproduced historical images of the year, used in textbooks, documentaries, and academic papers. Patricia published a comprehensive academic article in the Journal of African American History, analyzing the legal and social mechanisms that had allowed William Ashford to kidnap and enslave Sarah despite the existence of laws that supposedly protected her freedom. Michael wrote a book about the broader phenomenon of illegal enslavement in the North after the Civil War, using Sarah's story as a central case study. The book became a bestseller and sparked conversations in classrooms across the country. James was hired by several other historical societies to apply advanced imaging techniques to their photographic collection, searching for other hidden stories. But Rachel remained focused on Sarah herself. She worked with Gloria Thompson's family to create a memorial for Sarah, raising funds through crowdfunding to purchase a proper headstone for the Potter's Field grave, where Sarah had been buried anonymously. The headstone was installed on a cold day in March 2020, just before the pandemic shut down public gatherings. It read, Sarah, 1848-1867, daughter, sister, and free woman, enslaved unlawfully and murdered in Salem, Massachusetts. Her name carved in a basement floor endures. Her reflection captured in a mirror demands justice. Her memory honored by those who came after, she is not forgotten. Gloria and her family stood before the headstone along with Rachel, Patricia, Michael, James, and dozens of community members who had followed Sarah's story. She has a name now, Gloria said, her voice breaking. She has a place. She has people who know what happened to her. The impact of Sarah's story extended far beyond what Rachel and her colleagues had anticipated. By late 2020, 14 other cases of suspected illegal enslavement in the North during Reconstruction had been identified by historians using similar investigative techniques. Not all had photographic evidence as clear as Sarah's, but the pattern was unmistakable. Wealthy families in northern states had maintained enslaved people well after the 13th Amendment, hiding them in basements and attics, and facing little to no consequence when their crimes were discovered. The city of Salem issued a formal apology in June 2021, acknowledging that local authorities had failed to investigate Sarah's disappearance and death adequately. The city also commissioned a permanent memorial to Sarah and other victims of illegal enslavement to be installed near the site of the former Ashford mansion. The Ashford descendants, after initially resisting, eventually engaged with the history. Thomas Ashford, a great-great-grandson of William Ashford's brother, reached out to Rachel in the summer of 2021. I've spent the past year wrestling with what my ancestors did, he wrote in an email. I can't undo it. I can't make amends directly to Sarah or her family, but I want to acknowledge it publicly and support efforts to make sure this history is taught and remembered. Thomas worked with Gloria Thompson's family to establish a scholarship fund for descendants of enslaved people pursuing degrees in history, journalism, or law, fields that could help uncover and address historical injustices. The photograph itself continued to reveal new details. In 2022, another researcher examining the high-resolution scan discovered faint lettering on one of the walls in the background. Enhanced further, the letters spelled out part of James Morrison's business motto, truth in every frame. He wasn't just documenting his sister's crime, Patricia observed when she saw this detail. He was making a statement about photography itself as a tool for truth-telling, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Rachel had moved on to other projects, but Sarah's story remained central to her work. She gave lectures at universities, consulted on documentaries, and mentored young historians who wanted to use technology to uncover hidden histories. But the most meaningful moment came 3 years after the initial discovery, when Rachel received a package from a woman named Diane Richards in Virginia. Inside was a small daguerreotype, an even earlier form of photograph, showing a young black woman, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, wearing a simple dress and looking directly at the camera with serious, determined eyes. The note accompanying it read, "This is Sarah. Her mother had this photograph made in 1864, shortly before Sarah and her family left Virginia. My grandmother was Sarah's younger sister, and this photograph has been in our family ever since. When I saw the story about what happened to Sarah, I knew you should have this. Now people can see her face. Now she's not just a reflection in a mirror. She's real." Rachel immediately contacted Gloria and Diane, and together they organized for Sarah's daguerreotype to be displayed alongside the 1867 Ashford family photograph at the Massachusetts Historical Society. The contrast was powerful. Sarah at 16, free and hopeful, looking toward a future she believed held opportunity, and Sarah at 19, reduced to a shadowy reflection, imprisoned and dying. Visitors to the exhibition often stood between the two images for long periods, processing what they represented. Both the crime against Sarah and the fact that she had lived, had been loved, had hoped and dreamed before those dreams were stolen. This is why we do this work, Patricia said during the installation of Sarah's daguerreotype. Not just to expose crimes or assign blame, but to restore humanity to people who were treated as if they had none. Sarah was a person. She had a face, a name, a family. And now, because of a photographer's conscience and a historian's curiosity and a family's persistence, everyone knows it. On. The story of Sarah and the hidden reflection became a touchstone in conversations about historical memory, about whose stories get preserved and whose get erased, and about the ongoing work of confronting America's racial history. Rachel often thought about James Morrison's letter, about his claim that he was creating a record for someday when I'm no longer here to face the consequence. That someday had come 152 years later, and the consequences he feared, family shame, social condemnation, had indeed arrived for his descendants, but so had something else: accountability, truth, and the restoration of Sarah's dignity. On the 5th anniversary of the discovery, Gloria Thompson spoke at a symposium about hidden histories. She stood before an audience of hundreds, Sarah's daguerreotype projected on a screen behind her. My ancestor was murdered, Gloria said, and she was kidnapped, enslaved, tortured, and killed. For 152 years, no one knew, no one cared. But now we know, now we care, and that matters. It doesn't bring her back, but it honors her. It says that her life had value, that what happened to her was wrong, and that we refuse to forget. Gloria paused, looking up at Sarah's young face on the screen. She carved her name into a floor, hoping someone would find it. And we did. We found her. And now we'll make sure no one forgets her again. The photograph, once just an ordinary family portrait, had become extraordinary. Not because of its artistic merit or historical importance in the traditional sense, but because of what it revealed about the costs of silence, the power of evidence, and the long, difficult work of bringing hidden truths into the light. Sarah's reflection, barely visible in a mirror in the background of a wealthy family's photograph, had spoken across 150 years. And finally, people were listening,